The courtroom was silent except for the shuffling of papers and my mother's sharp intake of breath as Judge Harrison finished reading the verdict. $15 million. My parents' entire fortune. Split down the middle. Half to them, half to me. My father's face had gone completely white. My mother gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles matched his complexion. They stared at me like I was some stranger who had just walked into their living room and claimed ownership of everything they held dear. But I wasn't a stranger. I was their son. The son they tried to erase from their will 3 months ago. The son they thought would roll over and accept being written out of a legacy I helped build. They were wrong. The whole mess started on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. Sarah and I had just gotten engaged the weekend before, and I was floating on cloud 9 as I drove to my parents' estate in Malibu for our monthly family dinner. The ring had cost me 3 months of salary from my consulting job, but seeing Sarah's face when I proposed made every penny worth it. I couldn't wait to share the news with Mom and Dad. The Blackwood family estate sat on 12 acres overlooking the Pacific, a sprawling Mediterranean villa my great-grandfather built in the 1940s. Growing up there felt like living in a fairy tale, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers and ocean views that stretched to infinity. But that night, walking up the familiar stone steps, something felt different, cold. My mother answered the door with her usual perfect smile, but it never reached her eyes. My father stood behind her in the foyer, hands clasped behind his back like he was inspecting troops. "Michael," my mother said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news. "We need to talk." We settled in the formal living room, the one with the uncomfortable antique furniture that nobody actually liked, but everyone pretended was beautiful. My father poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon from the crystal decanter on the side table. He didn't offer me any. "I have some wonderful news," I started, but my father held up his hand. "Before you say anything, son, your mother and I have something important to discuss with you." The word son came out flat, mechanical, like he was reading from a script. My mother smoothed her skirt and looked everywhere except at me. "Michael, we've been doing some estate planning recently, making some changes." The room suddenly felt smaller. The ocean view that usually calmed me now seemed like a wall of gray nothingness. "What kind of changes?" My father knocked back his bourbon in one gulp. "We're restructuring our will, substantially. The foundation will be receiving the majority of our assets," my mother added quickly, referring to the Blackwood Foundation, their charitable organization focused on environmental conservation. "It's what your great-grandfather would have wanted, keeping the family legacy intact." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "And what about me?" Silence stretched between us like a canyon. My father refilled his glass. "There will be provisions for you, of course," my mother said finally. "A trust fund, enough to maintain your lifestyle." "How much?" Another silence, longer this time. 200,000, my father said without meeting my eyes. The number hit me like a physical blow. 200,000, out of 15 million, less than 2%. "Are you serious?" "It's more than enough to." "I helped build this company." The words exploded out of me before I could stop them. "I've worked summers at Blackwood Industries since I was 14. I gave up law school to help you modernize the whole operation. I brought in the digital transformation that saved us millions. And you're giving me $200,000? My mother's perfect composure finally cracked. "You chose to work for the company, Michael. Nobody forced you. I chose to work for the family business because you told me it was my legacy too." "Things change," my father said quietly. "Priorities shift." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about money or charity or great-grandfather's wishes. This was about Sarah. Sarah Martinez, whose father had been a construction worker and whose mother cleaned houses to put her through nursing school. Sarah, who spoke 3 languages and had graduated summa cum laude from USC but didn't have the right pedigree for Blackwood society. Sarah, who my parents barely tolerated at family gatherings and never included in photos for their foundation's annual report. "This is about Sarah, isn't it?" My mother's face flushed. "That girl is not. That woman is my fiancée." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. "Your what?" My father set down his glass so hard the crystal rang. "We got engaged last weekend. I came here to tell you." My mother made a sound like she was choking. "Michael, no. I love her, and she loves me. We're getting married whether you approve or not." "Not with our money, you're not." My father's voice had gone deadly quiet. If you marry that girl, you get nothing. Not 200,000, nothing. The fairy tale mansion suddenly felt like a prison. All those years growing up here, I thought I was a prince. Turns out I was just another asset to be managed. Fine, I said, standing up. Have it your way. Michael, please, my mother started, but I was already walking toward the door. Congratulations, I called back. You just lost your son to save your money. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Sarah was waiting in our apartment with takeout Chinese and a bottle of champagne to celebrate our engagement news. One look at my face and she knew something was catastrophically wrong. What happened? I told her everything. About the will, about the 200,000, about their ultimatum. She listened without saying a word, her face growing paler with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Maybe we should postpone the wedding, she said finally. What? No, absolutely not. Michael, we're talking about millions of dollars. Your future. My future is with you. Money doesn't change that. But even as I said it, I could feel something shifting between us. The weight of what we were up against, the enormity of what I was giving up. $15 million, generational wealth, security for our children and their children. Sarah took my hands in hers. I don't want to be the reason you lose your family. They're the ones choosing money over family, not me. But doubt had crept into her voice, and I could hear it. This was exactly what my parents had counted on. They knew Sarah well enough to know she'd never feel comfortable being the reason I got disinherited. They were counting on her conscience to do what their threats couldn't. 3 weeks later, I got the official notice from their attorney. I had been completely removed from the will. Every asset, every investment, every piece of property that should have been my birthright was now going to charity. But here's what my parents didn't know about their son. I inherited more from them than just DNA. I inherited their ruthlessness. I called my friend Jake Morrison, one of the best estate attorneys in Los Angeles. We'd gone to college together before I dropped out to join the family business. He specialized in will contests, and his track record was legendary. Michael Blackwood, he said when his secretary put me through. I heard you were working for your parents' company. How's the dynasty business? Complicated. I need your help. We met at his Century City office the next day. The 43rd floor had a view that rivaled my parents' estate, all glass and steel and the sprawling city below. Jake listened while I explained the situation, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. They completely disinherited you? He asked when I finished. Completely, unless I break up with my fiancée. And you've been working for the company how long? 12 years, since I was 18. Jake leaned back in his leather chair. Tell me about your contributions to the business. For the next hour, I laid out everything. The digital transformation project I'd led that modernized their entire operation system. The international expansion I'd negotiated that opened 3 new markets. The environmental certification program I developed that saved them millions in regulatory fees. The dozens of client relationships I'd personally cultivated and maintained. Do you have documentation for all this? Contracts, emails, project reports. I kept everything. Jake smiled for the first time since I'd walked into his office. Michael, are you familiar with quantum meruit? No. It's a legal principle that says if someone provides services expecting compensation and the other party accepts those services, they can't just walk away without paying, even without a formal contract. But I was paid. I drew a salary. For your regular work, yes, but what about all these special projects? The digital transformation alone probably saved them millions. Were you compensated separately for that? I thought back to all those late nights and weekends, all the travel and extra responsibilities I'd taken on because it was for the family. Never once had they offered additional compensation. It was always framed as my investment in my own future inheritance. No, they said it was part of building the legacy I'd eventually inherit. Exactly. Jake's smile got wider. They created an implied contract. You provided extraordinary services beyond your normal job scope with the explicit understanding that you were building toward inheriting the business. Now they're trying to breach that contract. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. Can we win? We can do better than win. California law is very favorable to family members who've been unjustly disinherited, especially when there's evidence of promises made and services rendered. If we can prove they used the promise of inheritance to extract free labor from you, we might be able to claim a significant portion of the estate. How significant? Potentially half. The number hit me like lightning. Half of $15 million, $7.5 million, enough to build a life with Sarah that my parents' money couldn't touch. What do we need to do? We need to document everything. Every project, every promise, every conversation about your future role in the company. And we need to move fast. Will contests in California have strict time limits? Over the next month, Jake and I built our case like architects constructing a skyscraper. We gathered contracts, emails, financial records showing the value of my contributions to Blackwood Industries. We interviewed former employees who could testify about my parents' promises regarding my inheritance. We compiled documentation of the company's increased valuation directly tied to projects I'd led. The evidence was overwhelming. For 12 years, my parents had explicitly and repeatedly told me I was working not just as an employee, but as the future owner of the company. They'd used that promise to get me to accept below-market compensation, to work unpaid overtime, to sacrifice personal opportunities for the good of the business. In legal terms, they'd created what's called a promissory estoppel situation. They'd made promises they knew I was relying on, promises that induced me to act in ways that benefited them financially. Now, they were trying to break those promises, leaving me with nothing. The law doesn't look kindly on that kind of behavior. Meanwhile, my relationship with Sarah was surviving, but just barely. The stress of the legal battle, combined with the complete estrangement from my family, was taking its toll on both of us. She supported my decision to fight the will, but I could see the doubt in her eyes during our quiet moments. She was wondering if we were throwing away a guaranteed $200,000 to chase something that might never materialize. What if we lose? She asked one night as we lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. We won't lose. But what if we do? The question hung between us like smoke, because losing meant more than just money. It meant my parents had outplayed me completely. It meant I'd given up my entire family and ended up with nothing. Then we build something better, I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. 6 weeks after we filed the contest, my parents' attorney called for a settlement meeting. Jake and I met them at the law offices of Hartley, Pierce, Associates, one of those white shoe firms that specialized in protecting old money from new problems. My parents looked like they'd aged 5 years and 2 months. My father's hair seemed grayer, and my mother had developed worry lines around her eyes that even her expensive skincare routine couldn't hide. They sat across the conference table like defendants waiting for a verdict. Their attorney, a silver-haired man named Richard Hartley, opened with what he clearly thought was a generous offer. My clients are prepared to reinstate Michael in the will at 5% of the estate, $750,000. Jake didn't even look up from his notes. Counter, offer, 50% of all assets. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother actually gasped. That's preposterous, Hartley sputtered. The will clearly states. The will is invalid, Jake interrupted calmly. Your clients created an implied contract through 12 years of promises and representations. They used those promises to extract unpaid labor and below-market compensation from Michael. That constitutes unjust enrichment on a massive scale. The company paid him a salary, below-market rate for his contributions, with the explicit understanding that the real compensation would come through inheritance, an inheritance they're now trying to deny. Jake opened a thick folder and began sliding documents across the table. Digital Transformation Project, 2018 through 2020. Michael's leadership increased operational efficiency by 47%, saving approximately $3.2 million annually. Compensation received beyond base salary, 0. Another document. International Expansion, 2019 through 2021. Michael negotiated entry into 3 new markets, generating approximately $8.7 million in new revenue. Additional compensation, 0. More documents. Environmental Compliance Program, 2020 through 2022. Michael's initiative reduced regulatory costs by $1.8 million annually while qualifying the company for substantial tax credits. Bonus compensation, 0. By the time Jake finished, the table was covered with evidence of my contributions. The dollar amounts were staggering, even to me. I'd known I was adding value, but seeing it quantified was breathtaking. The total monetary benefit to Blackwood Industries from Michael's extraordinary contributions exceeds $23 million over 4 years, Jake concluded, and that's a conservative estimate. My father finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Those were his job responsibilities. No, Jake said firmly. His job responsibilities are clearly outlined in his employment contract, which we've also submitted as evidence. Everything on this table was above and beyond those responsibilities. Work performed with the specific promise that he was building his inheritance. We'll need time to review this, Hartley said. You have 48 hours, Jake replied. After that, we go to trial. Walking out of that conference room felt like walking out of a burning building. My parents hadn't said a word to me directly, hadn't even made eye contact. But I could feel their shock, their growing realization that their plan to cut me out had backfired spectacularly. 2 days later, Hartley called back. They were willing to negotiate. The negotiations stretched over 3 weeks, with offers and counteroffers flying back and forth like artillery in a war. My parents' team tried everything, questioning the validity of the documentation, challenging the calculations of my contributions, arguing that family obligations don't create legal contracts. Jake demolished every argument with surgical precision. California case law was clear. When parents make explicit promises about inheritance to induce their children to provide services, they can't simply break those promises without consequences, especially when those services generated millions in value. The breakthrough came when Jake threatened to subpoena every client I'd brought to the company over the past 12 years. Many of them were personal relationships I'd cultivated, people who did business with Blackwood Industries specifically because of their trust in me. If those relationships disappeared when I left, the company would lose millions in ongoing revenue. Let's run the numbers, Jake said during one particularly tense phone call with their attorney. Michael leaves, takes his clients with him, and Blackwood Industries loses approximately 40% of their annual revenue. At current valuations, that represents a permanent loss of roughly $6 million in company value. That's speculation, Hartley protested. Is it? Would your clients like to risk finding out? The chess game was reaching its endgame, and we both knew it. Finally, with just days before the trial was scheduled to begin, they made their final offer, 40% of the estate, $6 million. I was tempted to take it. $6 million was more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. Enough to build any life Sarah and I wanted. Enough to prove my parents hadn't broken me. But Jake had a different perspective. They're scared, he told me over dinner at a restaurant in Beverly Hills. Really scared. That offer tells me they think we can win everything. Not everything. 50%. Michael, listen to me. Your parents have spent millions on legal fees already. Their reputation in the business community is taking hits. Word gets around when you're in a public legal battle with your own son. They're feeling pressure from all sides. What are you saying? I'm saying we have them exactly where we want them. We go to trial. The decision felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Accept $6 million and walk away, or risk everything for the chance at something bigger. I thought about Sarah, about the stress this whole process had put on our relationship, about the life we could build with $6 million, the security it would provide. Then I thought about my parents' faces in that conference room, about the way they tried to erase me from their lives like I was some inconvenient mistake. We go to trial. The trial was set for the Los Angeles Superior Court, Judge Patricia Harrison presiding. I'd done some research on Judge Harrison. She had a reputation for being fair but tough, especially in cases involving family disputes. She'd presided over several high-profile will contests and wasn't impressed by money or status. The courthouse was a brutalist concrete monument from the 1970s, all harsh angles and small windows that made it feel more like a fortress than a temple of justice. The courtroom itself was surprisingly small, with wood paneling that had seen better decades and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. My parents sat at the defendant's table with their team of lawyers, a small army of expensive suits and briefcases. They looked like corporate executives preparing for a hostile takeover, rather than parents fighting their own son. Jake had warned me that family legal battles were different from other kinds of litigation. The emotional stakes made everything more intense, more personal. Evidence that might seem dry and academic in a normal business dispute became weapons loaded with years of family history and resentment. The plaintiff will try to make this about family dysfunction, he told me during our trial preparation. They'll paint you as an ungrateful son who's trying to steal money you don't deserve. We counter by keeping the focus on the facts, the promises made, the services rendered, the value created. The trial began with opening statements. Hartley painted me as exactly what Jake had predicted, a spoiled child who'd never worked a real day in his life, who'd been handed opportunities and was now demanding payment for doing what any son should do for his family business. This is not a case about business contracts, he told the jury. This is about a son who worked for his family's company, drew a comfortable salary for 12 years, and is now claiming he deserves half their fortune because his parents chose to leave their money to charity instead of him. Jake's opening was surgical and precise. He laid out the financial evidence like a prosecutor building a murder case, each piece of documentation another nail in the coffin of my parents' defense. Over 12 years, the defendants made explicit, repeated promises to the plaintiff about his role in inheriting and managing their business empire. They used those promises to induce him to provide services worth millions of dollars at below-market compensation. When it came time to make good on those promises, they tried to walk away. The law doesn't allow that. The first week of testimony focused on establishing the timeline of promises my parents had made. Jake called former employees, family friends, even my high school guidance counselor, all testifying about conversations they'd witnessed regarding my future role in the company. The evidence was damning. Email after email from my parents talking about preparing Michael to take over, building the legacy for the next generation, Michael's future ownership responsibilities, board meeting minutes where they discussed succession planning with Michael as primary heir, performance reviews that explicitly mentioned my work as investment in his ownership development. My parents' attorney tried to argue that these were just general expressions of hope, not specific contractual promises. But the pattern was too clear, too consistent, spanning too many years and too many witnesses. The second week focused on the value of my contributions. Jake brought in business valuation experts who walked through each major project I'd led, quantifying the financial impact with spreadsheets and charts that looked like they belonged in a Fortune 500 annual report. The digital transformation project alone had increased company efficiency by 47%. The international expansion had opened up markets worth millions in ongoing revenue. The environmental compliance program had saved the company nearly $2 million per year in regulatory costs. In total, the expert testified, Mr. Blackwood's extraordinary contributions generated approximately $28 million in value to the company over 12 years, far exceeding his total compensation of approximately $1.2 million in salary and benefits. My parents looked smaller each day, hunched over the defendant's table like they were shrinking under the weight of the evidence. They barely looked at me throughout the entire proceedings, even when I took the stand to testify about our family meetings, our conversations about my future role, their explicit promises that I was working toward inheriting the business. They told me I was building my own legacy, I testified, that every project I took on, every sacrifice I made for the company was an investment in my future as the owner. They used that promise to get me to work for below-market compensation, to give up other opportunities, to dedicate my life to building their business. The defense's case was weak and getting weaker. They tried to argue that my contributions were just normal employee responsibilities, despite the clear evidence that my job description covered none of the major projects I'd led. They tried to claim that family conversations about inheritance weren't legally binding contracts, despite case law clearly establishing that such promises could create enforceable obligations when they induced reliance and detrimental action. Their strongest argument was emotional rather than legal, that children aren't entitled to their parents' money, that my parents had the right to leave their fortune to charity if they chose. The defendants don't dispute the evidence of promises made or services rendered, Jake argued in his closing statement. They're asking this court to rule that parents can use the promise of inheritance as a tool to extract free labor from their children, then walk away from those promises without consequence. That's not how the law works. That's not how justice works. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I spent those 6 hours in a coffee shop across the street from the courthouse, unable to eat or drink or focus on anything except the knowledge that my entire future hung in the balance of 12 strangers' decision. When the bailiff called us back, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely walk. Sarah squeezed my arm as we took our seats in the gallery. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Harrison asked. We have, Your Honor. Please read the verdict. The foreman, a middle-aged woman who'd taken careful notes throughout the trial, stood and unfolded a piece of paper. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Michael Blackwood. We award him 50% of the defendant's estate, valued at approximately $15 million. The courtroom erupted. Behind me, I could hear Sarah crying. At the defendant's table, my mother made a sound like she was choking. My father just stared straight ahead, his face blank. $7.5 million. Judge Harrison banged her gavel for order. The court accepts the jury's verdict. The estate will be divided equally between the defendants and the plaintiff. It was over. 12 years of promises, 3 months of legal warfare, 2 weeks of trial, and I'd won everything. But as I sat there listening to the judge's final instructions, something strange happened. Instead of triumph, I felt empty, hollow, like I'd won a war but lost something I couldn't name. My parents stood to leave without looking back. As they reached the courtroom doors, my father paused. For just a moment, he turned and met my eyes. In his face, I saw something I'd never seen before. Defeat. Complete, total defeat. Then they were gone. The aftermath of winning was stranger than the battle itself. The money was transferred into accounts Jake had set up, turning me into a multi-millionaire overnight. Sarah and I bought a house in the Hollywood Hills. Nothing as grand as my parents' Malibu estate, but beautiful in its own way. We planned our wedding for the following spring. But the victory felt Pyrrhic. I'd won their money, but lost my family completely. My parents never spoke to me again after the trial. When I sent them an invitation to our wedding, it came back marked, "Return to sender." Sometimes I wondered if that had been their final move in a chess game I'd never fully understood. Maybe they'd known from the beginning that this would be the cost of fighting them. Maybe they'd counted on the money not being worth the price of losing them forever. On our wedding day, as Sarah and I exchanged vows in front of our friends, I found myself scanning the crowd one last time, hoping against logic that they might have come. That somehow, seeing me happy might have been enough to bridge the gap between us. They weren't there. But Sarah was. Beautiful, brilliant Sarah, who'd stood by me through the whole ordeal, who'd supported my decision to fight even when it would have been easier to walk away. In the end, maybe that was what my parents had never understood. Some things are worth more than money, but some fights are worth having anyway. The settlement was finalized 6 months later. $7.5 million, minus legal fees and taxes, but still enough to build any life we wanted. We started a consulting firm together, using my business experience and Sarah's healthcare background to help hospitals improve their operations. It felt good to build something that was entirely ours. I still drive past my parents' estate sometimes when I'm in Malibu. The gates are always closed, the garden still perfectly maintained. Sometimes I wonder if they think about me, if they regret how it all played out, but mostly I try not to think about them at all. The money sits in investment accounts, growing steadily, securing our future and the futures of children we haven't had yet. It's everything I thought I wanted when I was growing up in that fairy tale mansion, but it came with a price I hadn't anticipated, the knowledge that my parents chose their principles over their son. In the quiet moments, usually late at night when Sarah is asleep beside me, I sometimes wonder if there could have been another way. If I could have found words that would have made them see reason, made them understand that love shouldn't come with conditions attached. But then I remember their faces in that courthouse, the cold calculation in their eyes as they tried to erase me from their lives for choosing love over their approval, and I know I made the right choice. The judge's verdict didn't just split their fortune, it split our family permanently. They were speechless when they heard those numbers, watching everything they tried to keep from me handed over by 12 jurors who saw through their manipulation. Sometimes justice looks like a gavel falling in a courtroom. Sometimes it looks like a bank transfer that changes everything. And sometimes it looks like walking away from people who never loved you as much as they loved their control over you. I got their money, they kept their principles, and we all learned that sometimes winning and losing are the same thing, just seen from different sides of a courthouse door that never opens again.